Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. A seat at the table. Darnell Morgan adjusted the strap of his briefcase and glanced at his boarding pass one last time as he approached the gate. The polished floor of the airport terminal gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting the steady stream of passengers moving purposefully toward their destinations. The air buzzed with the hum of announcements, rolling suitcases, and distant conversations. Yet, for Darnell, the noise faded into the background as his mind wandered homeward. 3 weeks away from Lisa and their 2 kids had been far too long. His phone buzzed, and he instinctively pulled it from his pocket. A text from Lisa popped up, accompanied by a picture. Marcus, their 7-year-old, was giving his 4-year-old sister Zoe a unique hairstyle, which could only be described as enthusiastically avant-garde. Darnell chuckled softly, his heart warming at the sight. He typed back, missing my little stylist and his muse. Home soon, adding a heart emoji, an addition that Marcus had recently declared mandatory in all family texts. He reached the gate marked A7, where a professional-looking attendant stood behind the counter. She greeted him with a warm, practiced smile that lit up further upon recognizing him. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," she said, scanning his boarding pass. "Back to your usual seat, 2A. Would you like your coffee before boarding?" "Not this time, Sarah, but thanks," Darnell replied with a smile. "How's the day treating you?" "Busy, but I can't complain," she said, her tone genuine. "Enjoy your flight." Moments like these made him appreciate the little things, being remembered, the ease of familiarity, and the subtle respect he had earned. It was these quiet affirmations of success, far more than the luxury of a first-class ticket, that grounded him. He entered the first-class lounge and found a quiet corner to check his emails. His inbox was bursting, as usual, but one thread stood out. His investment team had sent updates on a potential project, a tech startup aiming to revolutionize clean energy in underserved urban areas. Darnell smiled to himself. Projects like this made him proud. They were about more than financial returns, they were about creating opportunities, just as he had once needed someone to create for him. His phone buzzed again, this time with a text from his sister Tamara. "Don't forget Mom's birthday dinner next week. No excuses, big shot." He laughed and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it for the world. Tell her I'll bring the cake." The announcement for priority boarding interrupted his thoughts. He gathered his things and made his way to the gate. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, a sense of accomplishment settled over him. Every inch of this journey, the long hours, the strategic risks, the moments of doubt, had led him to this moment. The flight attendant at the cabin door greeted him warmly. "Welcome back, Mr. Morgan." "Good to be back," he said, stepping into the first-class cabin. Darnell quickly found his seat, 2A. He placed his leather briefcase, still as sturdy as the day Lisa had given it to him, into the overhead compartment and settled into his seat. As he adjusted the headrest, his gaze drifted to the window. The morning sun cast a golden hue across the tarmac, and he allowed himself a rare moment of quiet reflection. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. "You belong wherever you decide to be, baby. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That advice had carried him through many challenges, the skeptical looks when he first entered boardrooms dominated by older, white executives, the subtle, and sometimes overt, dismissals of his ideas, and the moments when he doubted himself. His mother had always believed in him, even when the world seemed determined not to. As other passengers began filing into the cabin, Darnell opened the biography he'd brought with him. It was about Katherine Johnson, the NASA mathematician whose calculations had made space travel possible. Her story of resilience and brilliance resonated deeply with him. Midway through the first chapter, he felt someone staring at him. Glancing up, he saw a man standing in the aisle, holding a boarding pass. The man appeared to be in his 50s, with graying hair and a tailored suit that screamed old money. His gaze lingered on Darnell for a moment too long. Darnell returned his attention to his book, but the man's presence remained, an unspoken tension hanging in the air. The man leaned toward a flight attendant, gesturing toward the rows. His voice was low, but the irritation in his tone carried across the cabin. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice louder now as he addressed the flight attendant. "I think there's been a mistake with the seating arrangements." Darnell's hand stilled on the page of his book. He'd been in this situation before. Different faces, different settings, but the same underlying message: you don't belong here. The flight attendant maintained her professional demeanor, though her smile wavered slightly. "Could you clarify the issue, sir?" The man gestured vaguely in Darnell's direction. "I just think, well, I believe some seats might have been mistakenly assigned." The flight attendant turned to Darnell. "May I see your boarding pass, Mr. Morgan?" Without a word, Darnell handed it over, his face neutral. She scanned it, then turned back to the man. "Mr. Morgan is correctly seated in 2A, sir. Is there anything else I can assist you with?" The man hesitated, his face flushing slightly. He glanced at Darnell, his expression unreadable, before shaking his head. "No, thank you." As the flight attendant returned to her station, Darnell caught the man's eye and gave him a polite smile. Inside, though, he felt a flicker of frustration. He'd learned long ago how to manage moments like this: stay calm, stay professional, and let his presence speak louder than his words. Settling back into his seat, he returned to his book. The man moved down the aisle, but Darnell couldn't shake the feeling of being scrutinized. The weight of the moment lingered, a reminder that even success didn't shield him from prejudice. But Darnell had faced bigger challenges. This was just another reminder of why he worked so hard, not just for himself, but for others who might follow in his footsteps. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Darnell looked out the window. The city below began to blur, shrinking as the plane ascended. He thought of his family, his mother's wisdom, and the clean energy project waiting for his decision. The sky stretched wide and open, limitless. Just like his future, the weight of expectations. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Darnell took a moment to reflect on what had just happened. The incident with the man in the aisle was nothing new, just another chapter in a long book of encounters where his presence in certain spaces was questioned. It was a subtle but persistent reminder that, despite his achievements, some people still saw him as out of place. He closed his book and leaned back in his seat, letting his thoughts drift to his early days. Growing up in the bustling heart of Detroit, Darnell had learned early on that life wasn't always fair. His mother, Evelyn, worked 2 jobs, one at a local diner and another cleaning offices at night. She'd come home exhausted but still found time to help him with his homework, insisting that education was his ticket out of the cycle of poverty. Their neighborhood wasn't the kind of place people associated with success stories. Abandoned buildings dotted the streets, and the sound of sirens was a nightly soundtrack. But Evelyn refused to let their surroundings define them. "You're going to change the world someday," she'd say, her voice full of conviction. "But you've got to believe in yourself first." Darnell had taken her words to heart. In high school, he poured himself into his studies, often staying up late to finish assignments after his part-time job. His determination paid off when he earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. But stepping onto that campus had been a culture shock. Surrounded by classmates who came from wealth and privilege, Darnell often felt like an outsider. He didn't have designer clothes or the latest gadgets, but he had something more valuable: grit. He majored in finance, drawn to the idea of creating opportunities, not just for himself, but for others. After graduation, he landed a job at a small investment firm. The pay was modest, but it was a start. Darnell quickly proved himself, identifying promising ventures that others overlooked. His big break came when he invested in a fledgling software company run by 2 college friends. While others dismissed the startup as a risky gamble, Darnell saw potential. His instincts were right, the company exploded in popularity, and his initial investment turned into a small fortune. From there, his career skyrocketed. He started his own firm, focusing on ventures that combined profit with purpose. Over the years, he built a reputation as a sharp, ethical investor who believed in giving back. A flight attendant interrupted his thoughts, offering him a choice of breakfast options. Darnell chose the omelette and thanked her. As she walked away, he glanced around the cabin. The man from earlier sat a few rows ahead, engrossed in his tablet. Darnell wondered briefly if the man realized the weight of his assumptions. Probably not. People like him rarely did. He returned to his book, trying to immerse himself in Katherine Johnson's story. Her brilliance and perseverance in the face of systemic barriers were inspiring, a testament to the power of resilience. But as much as he admired her journey, Darnell couldn't shake the weight of his own thoughts. The world often painted success as a cure-all, a shield against prejudice and doubt. Yet, here he was, a millionaire investor, still encountering the same biases he'd faced as a young man. It wasn't just about him, though. It was about the next generation, people like Marcus and Zoe, who deserved a world where their worth wasn't questioned based on appearances. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing clear skies and an on-time arrival. Darnell glanced at his watch, calculating how soon he'd be back home. The thought brought a smile to his face. As he adjusted in his seat, the man from earlier rose and walked back toward the galley. On his way, he paused by Darnell's row. For a moment, it seemed as though he might say something, but he hesitated and continued on his way. Darnell exhaled, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. He didn't need an apology, but it would have been nice to see some acknowledgement of the situation. Later, as the cabin prepared for landing, the flight attendant returned to collect empty trays. She paused by Darnell's seat. "Mr. Morgan, if there's anything you need, please let us know," she said softly, her eyes briefly flickering toward the man ahead. Darnell nodded, appreciating the unspoken understanding. "Thank you," he said. As the plane descended, the cityscape below came into view. Skyscrapers gleamed in the morning sun, and highways snaked through the urban sprawl. For Darnell, the view symbolized progress, both his own and the potential of the communities he cared about. He thought of the clean energy startup his firm was considering. Projects like that weren't just about profits. They were about giving people the tools to thrive. The wheels touched down smoothly, and the familiar jolt of landing pulled him from his thoughts. As the plane taxied to the gate, Darnell felt a sense of anticipation. He couldn't wait to see Lisa and the kids, to share breakfast stories and maybe even let Marcus attempt another creative hairstyle. But as he gathered his belongings, he made a mental note to revisit the incident from earlier. Not for his own sake, but because moments like these were opportunities to challenge assumptions and foster understanding. Success wasn't just about personal achievement, it was about using that platform to make a difference. And Darnell was determined to keep making that difference, one step, one investment, and one conversation at a time, confronting the quiet prejudice. Darnell exited the plane with a purposeful stride, his briefcase swinging by his side. The air in the terminal felt fresher, and the buzz of travelers moving through their routines brought him back to the here and now. But the earlier confrontation lingered in his mind, a pebble in his shoe that refused to be ignored. As he made his way to the baggage claim, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning around, he found himself face to face with the man from the plane. The man adjusted his tie nervously, his confident demeanor from earlier now replaced with an awkward stiffness. "Excuse me," the man began, his voice hesitant. I wanted to apologize for earlier. I think I may have misjudged you." Darnell studied him for a moment, measuring his sincerity. He'd heard apologies like this before, sometimes genuine, sometimes just an attempt to smooth things over. "It's fine," Darnell said, his tone neutral. "We all have moments of misjudgment." The man nodded, clearly relieved, but he lingered as if waiting for something more. "It's just that I wasn't expecting. I assumed," he trailed off, his words fumbling under the weight of his own assumptions. Darnell decided to help him out, not to let him off the hook, but to turn the moment into a teachable one. "You assumed I wasn't supposed to be in first class," Darnell said plainly, holding the man's gaze. Because people like me don't usually fit the picture you have in your mind. The man flushed, his discomfort evident. I suppose that's true, he admitted. I didn't mean to offend you. It's just that, well, you don't see it every day. Maybe you should start looking more carefully, Darnell said, his voice calm but firm. Because people like me are here, whether you notice or not. The man nodded again, murmured another apology, and walked away. Darnell watched him go, feeling a mix of satisfaction and weariness. Conversations like this were necessary, but they were also exhausting. As he waited for his luggage, Darnell thought back to another time when he'd been underestimated. It was during his first major deal, years ago. A group of investors had invited him to pitch his ideas at a high-profile conference. He'd walked into the boardroom, armed with a meticulously crafted presentation and a vision for a renewable energy project that could revolutionize low-income neighborhoods. But the skepticism in the room was palpable. The other attendees, all older, all white, had barely acknowledged him when he introduced himself. During the presentation, they'd interrupted him with dismissive questions, their tones laced with doubt. Despite the hostility, Darnell had held his ground. He'd answered every question with precision, backed up his ideas with data, and refused to let their condescension rattle him. By the end of the meeting, he'd not only won their respect but also secured the funding he needed to bring his project to life. That deal had been a turning point, not just for his career but for his confidence. It had taught him that resilience wasn't just about weathering the storm, it was about standing tall in the midst of it. A loud beep signaled the start of the luggage carousel, snapping Darnell out of his thoughts. He spotted his suitcase, a sleek black roller bag Lisa had gifted him last Christmas, and pulled it off the conveyor. He was about to head toward the exit when he noticed a young woman struggling with an oversized suitcase. She looked around, clearly overwhelmed, and Darnell stepped forward to help. Here, let me get that for you, he said, lifting the bag onto a cart. The woman smiled gratefully. Thank you so much. This thing has a mind of its own. No problem, Darnell replied. Where are you headed? Visiting family, she said. It's my first time traveling alone, and I'm a little nervous. Darnell nodded, remembering his own early travel days. You'll be fine. Just take it one step at a time. As she wheeled her cart away, Darnell felt a sense of satisfaction. Moments like these reminded him of the values his mother had instilled in him: kindness, humility, and the importance of lifting others up. Outside the terminal, a black SUV waited for him. The driver, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile, greeted him warmly. Good morning, Mr. Morgan. Welcome back. Morning, James, Darnell replied, climbing into the back seat. How's the family? Doing well, thank you, James said as he pulled into traffic. And yours? They're good. Can't wait to see them, Darnell said, his excitement bubbling to the surface. As the city skyline came into view, Darnell allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The incident on the plane, the conversation with the man, even the memory of his early struggles, they all served as reminders of how far he'd come and how far there was still to go. His phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Lisa. Marcus wants to know if you're ready for a pancake battle tomorrow morning. He's been practicing. Darnell laughed, picturing his son in the kitchen, flour smudged on his face, declaring himself the pancake champion. I'm always ready, he typed back. As they neared his neighborhood, James turned onto a quiet, tree-lined street. The houses here weren't ostentatious, but they were elegant and full of character, a testament to the thriving community Darnell had chosen to be a part of. When they pulled into the driveway, Darnell stepped out and was immediately greeted by the sound of little feet pounding against the wooden floor. The front door flew open, and Marcus and Zoe came charging out, their laughter ringing through the crisp morning air. Daddy, they shouted in unison, launching themselves into his arms. Lisa appeared at the door, her smile warm and welcoming. Welcome home, she said, wrapping her arms around him once the kids had their turn. Darnell felt a deep sense of contentment as he stood there, his family surrounding him. This was what he worked for, what made every struggle worthwhile. And as he carried his kids inside, their chatter filling the house, he made a silent promise to keep pushing forward, not just for himself but for them and the world they were growing up in. Because changing perceptions and breaking barriers wasn't just a personal mission, it was a legacy worth building. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, bathing the room in a warm glow. Darnell stood at the stove, flipping a pancake with practiced ease as Marcus hovered by his side, apron tied loosely around his small waist. "You have to wait until the bubbles pop, Marcus," Darnell instructed. "That's how you know it's ready to flip." Marcus nodded seriously, gripping the handle of his own pan. "I'm gonna make the best pancakes ever," he declared. Zoe sat at the counter, her tiny legs swinging beneath her stool as she colored in a picture of the family. "I want chocolate chips in mine," she announced. Lisa laughed from the dining table, sipping her coffee. "Looks like we've got a serious competition on our hands this morning." Darnell glanced over his shoulder at his wife, his heart swelling with gratitude. These simple moments were what kept him grounded, what reminded him of the life he had built and the family he was determined to protect and inspire. Later that day, after the pancake battle had been declared a tie, much to Marcus's delight, Darnell retreated to his home office. The space was a reflection of his journey. A sleek desk sat against a wall lined with bookshelves, each shelf filled with titles ranging from business strategy to biographies of trailblazers he admired. On his desk was a framed photo of his mother, her eyes radiating the same determination she had passed down to him. Beside it was a picture of Lisa and the kids, taken during a recent vacation. Darnell powered up his laptop, his mind shifting back to work. He had an important virtual meeting with the founders of the startup he'd been considering investing in, a group of young engineers working on sustainable urban housing solutions. As the video call began, the faces of the founders appeared on the screen, their excitement palpable. "Mr. Morgan," one of them began, "we can't thank you enough for taking the time to meet with us again. Your feedback on our last pitch was invaluable." Darnell nodded, his tone encouraging. "I see a lot of potential in what you're doing. Affordable housing with a focus on sustainability is exactly what urban communities need right now. But potential alone isn't enough, you need a solid execution plan. Let's talk about your next steps." The conversation flowed easily, Darnell offering advice and challenging them to refine their vision. He could see the same hunger in their eyes that had driven him in his early days, and it fueled his determination to help them succeed. By the end of the call, the founders looked energized, their ideas sharper and their confidence bolstered. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan," one of them said earnestly. "Your belief in us means everything." Darnell smiled. "Don't thank me yet. Show me results, and we'll celebrate together." As the afternoon turned to evening, Darnell found himself back in the kitchen, this time preparing dinner with Lisa. The kids played in the living room, their laughter echoing through the house. "Long day?" Lisa asked, handing him a cutting board piled high with vegetables. "Productive," Darnell replied, slicing the vegetables with precision. "The startup I've been mentoring is really coming together. They remind me of myself back in the day." Lisa smiled, her eyes sparkling with pride. "You've always had a gift for seeing the bigger picture, for helping others see it too." Darnell paused, looking at her thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about how far we've come? From that tiny apartment with the leaky faucet to this, everything we've built?" "All the time," Lisa said softly. "But what I think about most is how you've stayed the same through it all. Success didn't change you, Darnell, it just gave you a bigger platform to be who you've always been." Her words hit him deeply, and he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. After dinner, the family gathered in the living room for their weekly tradition, storytelling time. Each person took turns sharing a story, real or imagined, while the others listened intently. When it was Darnell's turn, Marcus piped up. "Tell us about the time you beat the man on the plane, Daddy." Lisa raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. "Beat the man?" she asked, amused. Darnell chuckled, shaking his head. "It wasn't about beating him, Marcus. It was about teaching him something he didn't understand. He recounted the story, simplifying the details for the kids but emphasizing the lessons. Sometimes, people will judge you before they even know you. They'll look at the color of your skin, the way you dress, or where you come from, and they'll decide you don't belong. But you can't let their judgment define you. You show them who you are, not with your words, but with your actions. Marcus listened intently, his eyes wide. So you showed him you belong in first class, because you worked hard? That's right, Darnell said. And more importantly, I showed him that everyone deserves respect, no matter where they come from. Zoe, who had been quiet until now, chimed in. Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. Darnell felt his throat tighten, and he pulled her into a hug. You're already better than me, sweetheart, he said softly. Later that night, as the house settled into silence, Darnell stood on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. He thought about the path he had walked to get here, the challenges, the victories, the moments of doubt. He thought about the man on the plane, the startup founders, and his children's bright futures. Darnell knew that his journey wasn't just about personal success. It was about paving the way for others, breaking down barriers, and proving that resilience, determination, and kindness could change the world. And as he turned to head inside, he felt a deep sense of purpose. This was his legacy, a legacy worth building, one story at a time.